Trump's tariff plan has 3 steps and his goal to reindustrialize the US. But uska India pe kya asar hoga? To understand that, we must first understand the plan. The first step is tariff chaos. In this first step, Trump's tariffs shake up the whole world order. And his confusion, chaos and calamity ke beech, Trump targets the weakest nations to create favorable deals. But the stronger nations will still fight back. And that is why we have the second step. Reciprocal tariffs. This makes sure that retaliation becomes futile. क्योंकि आप जितना भी इनके ऊपर टैरिफ्स बढ़ाओगे, यूएस रिटर्न में उतने ही टैरिफ्स और लेवी करेगा. So this becomes a lose-lose game. And that is why no matter what happens, थोड़ा टाइम लग सकता है, but यूएस और चाइना के बीच में भी एक डील होगी ही. So that Trump can then implement his next step, weakening the US dollar. It is already happening, with the whole world thinking that the US is no longer a safe market. But Mr. Trump must be quite happy with that, because that's exactly what he wanted. A weaker dollar means more exports from the US. Let's quickly understand this idea. So let's say you wanted to buy an iPhone in the US in 2024. उस वक्त आईफोन का दाम था अराउंड $999 एंड डॉलर टू INR का कन्वर्जन अराउंड 80 था, सो दैट बिकम्स अबाउट 80,000 रुपीज, राइट? इन 2025, लेट्स से इसी आईफोन का दाम बिकॉज ऑफ टैरिफ्स एंड एवरीथिंग एल्स बिकम्स $1,499. At current US to INR conversion, this would be about 1,27,000 rupees. That's a huge increase, right? More than a 50% increase. But if dollar falls, let's say dollar ki value goes down to 70 per dollar, 70 INR per dollar, that would mean ye same 1,499 ends up only costing 1,05,000 to someone in India to buy. Notice, iPhone ka daam within the US has risen by 50%. But for someone in India buying it, this has gone from 80,000 to 1,05,000, which is about a 30% increase. So globally, when US is trying to export these iPhones now, yes, the cost has increased domestically, but for exports, the costs have not increased too much. And now if we apply this to everything that the US wants to manufacture, यहाँ पर वो एक बड़ा एडवांटेज क्रिएट कर लेते हैं. बिकॉज अराउंड 30% तो उनके टैरिफ वॉल्यूम्स ही हैं जो वो बड़े नेशंस पे लेवी कर रहे हैं. चाइना पे तो उससे भी ज़्यादा है. एंड दैट्स हाउ devaluing the dollar will increase the exports from the US. So all this sounds amazing. US के imports घटेंगे, exports बढ़ेंगे and tariff से taxes भी आएंगे. But the question is, why would other countries agree to this? Because the US will force them to. As Scott Bessent explains it, the US will create 3 different buckets of countries. सबसे पहला green bucket is where you have countries like Taiwan and Vietnam, जो US की हर डिमांड से agree करेंगे and eventually they'll become nothing more than subsidiaries of the US in all but name. इन countries के साथ the US is expected to keep its trade policy very permissive. But then we have the second bucket, which should include countries from Europe and even us, India. These are countries that are going to get deals that stand somewhere in the mid ground. So there will be compromises from both ends. And finally, we have the red bucket, which might include China and Singapore as of now. These are countries that are fighting back with reciprocal tariffs. And nobody wants to be in the red bucket, because that means you are cut off from the world's biggest consumer market. And that's bad for any company. Now, what does being in the yellow bucket mean for India and our stocks? Well, tariffs in themselves should not affect us too much. The problem will be the trickle-down effects that start from these tariffs. First, tariffs की वजह से US consumption will drop since everything will get more expensive. That drop in demand will affect all exporters to the US as well as US-based companies. इसकी वजह से US companies की earnings will drop since they do have to absorb some of the tariffs as well. For example, Tesla imports about $100 million worth of auto parts from India. The same will now cost them at least $110 million, which will hurt either their margins or their volumes. This means the US market will keep going lower, but more importantly, it means discretionary spending on Indian IT stocks will fall. That is bad for India's greatest employer, especially for the affluent classes. India's economy is mostly driven by domestic demand. And most of that domestic demand over the last 3 or 4 years has come from the affluent service class. And as the IT suffers, India's service class takes the biggest blow. That means India's domestic consumption falls. So yes, India can replace Chinese exports to a large extent. But अगर US में demand ही कम हो गई तो वह extra exports हम send किसको करेंगे? Add to that, India ka youth cannot suddenly go from IT services to making mobile phones in factories, right? So the threat to unemployment is very real. Now, can we avoid this? There's only one way, that the tariffs are completely removed. Because even if the US and China come down to a 20% tariff barrier, that is still a big hit on all company earnings and the global GDP, a recessionary level hit. Now, how much will the impact be on India? Only time will tell. But Trump's larger plan is not just about tariffs or making China bow down. Trump's plan is to bring the American economy back to an industrialized nation's economy, not one that is based on consumption. And if that is to happen, the whole global order is going to change. Not in a month, not in 3 months. This is going to take years to happen. And that usually means a lot of uncertainty, which in turn means that the markets remain subsided. The good part though is that this is in fact a good plan. What Trump is trying to do is very good for the American economy and for global trade in the long run. The problem though is the person executing this plan. He does not have a lot of trust in him among the world leaders. So even with stocks this corrected, I'm being conservative with my money and I won't be buying just now. Let's allow these things to clear out, and especially with banks, I would be very, very careful. With that said, best of luck.